I want to welcome Dana Shen, who's our guest today. Diversity and inclusion is a very personal topic and we all look at it through a different lens. So Dana today is going to be bringing us her lens, her experience and expertise around this important topic. So thanks very much, Dana, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Could you, before maybe we get started, just tell us a little bit about your background, your professional experience and a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Andrew. And I hope it's okay to also open with an acknowledgement of all the countries that you are on today.
Absolutely.
When you're listening to this, and to recognise elders past and present, but also the cultural authority in the room and the allies that are supporting my peoples. So first of all, I wanted to start a bit more about my professional background. So I started off as a youth worker, and that was in Mount Barker and Murray Bridge.
Nice.
And essentially what I did from there was I began to go into policy positions in health services. This covered both country areas as well as in metropolitan services. I also had the opportunity to work for child protection for a period of time, so I did that for about 3 years. And then I joined an organisation called the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and that was a really wonderful opportunity, not only to be in an organisation outside of government, but also to be involved in design in a particular type of way. And then after that, I decided to create my own business. So I'm called DS Consultancy now, and predominantly the work that I do is I work with social services, a lot of Aboriginal organisations as well as mainstream government departments and organisations. And I'm predominantly look at work where we are redesigning and improving services for a number of populations, but in particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Yep.
And that's my passion. And why that's so important to me is that I'm Aboriginal Chinese. I'm from the Ngarrindjeri Nation, and I just have a real personal commitment to doing things that are important for my people. And I think that it is valuable. And also I'm Chinese. So I was brought up in a really, I think, interesting context with those two cultures that's kind of, I guess, culminated in who I am and what I do nowadays.
Yeah, and two very strong cultures as well. So that's an interesting mix of culture. I'm just curious, could you talk a little bit more about what it's like to kind of live in both those spaces, Chinese and Ngarrindjeri?
So it was a really interesting time growing up, and I will talk a little bit about the harder experiences in my life because it explains why I do what I do.
Yeah.
I was brought up by, I think, two young parents that were really doing the best that they could, but they had a lot of things going on in their lives, and one of them was the use of alcohol. And that had an impact on, I think the way that they lived their life and also how they brought my brother and I up. And so we had, a young Aboriginal woman and a young Chinese man. And because of some changes that my mum decided to make in her life. So basically she is this amazing woman who ended up running an Aboriginal organisation, but there were a lot of hard choices that she had to make earlier in her life, and one of them was that she decided to come out as a lesbian woman.
Yep.
And that was important for her, in terms of her happiness and her life and all those things. That was an interesting decision for a Chinese family.
Yes.
Because for a range of reasons, they found that difficult. They found it difficult that my father was actually with, firstly, an Aboriginal person, someone that's quite different from Chinese culture. And then it was challenging when my mum decided to come out and decided to leave the family. This meant that my Chinese grandparents decided to come over from Hong Kong and to take care full time of my brother and I.
Yep.
Whilst my mum had left and my dad was working, and it gave us the opportunity, an interesting opportunity, to learn from older Chinese people.
Yeah.
My grandparent, my grandfather in particular, he did it really hard as a younger person. He grew up in a poor family, and it was him that had to make his own life. We were always seen by him and my grandmother as people that absolutely had the potential to do well. To the point that, and in fact, that we should make good money out of it too.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as my mum was, growing and changing her life, over time I got to have, again, stronger connections with my Aboriginal community. So I got to hang out with my cousins and spend time with them in big families. And we were pretty unique in all of that. You know, a lot of my cousins were doing things a bit harder than us, but they took care of us and they looked out for us.
As you got older, what did that experience mean for your life, personally and professionally?
One of the things I see, in particular around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this nation, is that I believe there's not enough hope and belief in what our people can do. I see such strength and resilience in our communities, and amazingly clever people, but not all people see that in that way. But I had the unique opportunity to have people that expected me to do well. It wasn't just because of the cultural aspect of the Chinese influence, and because my grandfather had done it in really difficult circumstances, we were expected to do well. In terms of my Aboriginal family, I had amazing relations around me. Just fun, love, kindness, welcoming all around me. Now, where this got hard was in my late teens. A number of my aunties and uncles died, and they died young. And that was in relation to things like heroin use and suicide and other forms of drug use. And that really devastated my grandmother, and it had a huge impact on my family.
Of course.
And you get to have a real understanding. We talk about, particularly in organisations that provide service delivery to our people, intergenerational trauma or the statistics that talk about our people. But when you are one of those statistics, and you feel what it means to be that, it's a profound experience. And that had a big impact on me about what I wanted to do in my life, because I had these two kind of opposing experiences. These amazing leaders like my mum, and this absolute devastation of my family. And so actually what that's taught me is that I need to be able to hold hope and hurt at the same time. And in fact, that's really important for practitioners in general.
In terms of your experience, both being somebody that identified with the issues that are that an organisation like ac.care seeks to address, but also then from a professional side of being part of that solution, what would your advice be for us as practitioners around our approach to dealing with vulnerability and people who are diverse and might have additional barriers for engaging with organisations like ours?
A couple of things are important. I think the first thing is that it's important as practitioners, wherever we are, that we have an understanding of ourselves. What are our values and our history? What are the traumas and hurts that we hold that can impact the way we react to other people, think about other people, speak about other people? Getting to know ourselves and our biases intimately, as best we can, is really important. Now, sometimes this is difficult. So, for instance, there's unconscious biases.
Yeah.
There's things that affect the way we act and see the world that we don't always notice all the time. But what can help with that is surrounding ourselves with people that help us to see that. That's why diversity and the multitude of what that means in terms of voice and experience is so important.
Yeah.
Not only is it valuable in and of itself, but around us it can help us to learn and understand who we are and what can catch us sometimes. So I think that's a really important one. The second one, I think, is really thinking about your understanding about what it means to be an expert and a professional. We are brought into positions for a whole lot of expertise, whether that's cultural knowledge or academic knowledge, theoretical knowledge, practice knowledge, whatever those things are. It's really important to have those kinds of experiences. But what I would say to practitioners, and what I think about a lot myself, is in what ways can our professionalism or our expertise sometimes separate us from understanding really what people are going through in their lives? And to really think about that. Now, part of it is recognising that we don't all have the same shared lived experiences, and not to pretend that that's the case.
Yeah.
The other part of it, though, is that as human beings we have a lot of shared experiences, and having greater levels of empathy for people and connection with people can actually create a much better opportunity to actually work with people and support people, and for them to trust you. So I would say think carefully about how your expertise and professionalism can get in the way of things sometimes. So really thinking about what you bring to your role in terms of your positional power, and how you create space for others to have a voice is really important. So for instance, if you're in senior roles, are there opportunities where you can give and make sure there are spaces for the diversity of the people that work in the organisation? Are you always the right person to be there? You might not be. You might be hierarchically the right person. You might not necessarily be, in terms of the continuum of representation, the right person. So I think thinking about who you are, where you sit in an organisation, and who is missing out on being in certain places, and how do you create space for that, is really important.
Could you expand a little bit about the importance of relationship building and how that helps us get to where we need to be?
Absolutely. So relationship in this work, and I've experienced this in different ways myself personally, is actually at the centre of all of this. Because, for example, how we create safety for people, how we create spaces of healing for people, the things that will be profound in the end for our colleagues and the people that we work alongside and with, is the extent to which we create interactions that give space. And to give space in different ways. First of all, how do we give space to really listen to people? Human beings really appreciate others caring about what they say and their experience. But often in these systems, it is a process of trying to understand information to actually give a certain type of service.
Yeah.
Now, whilst that's an important thing, the success of that service, the engagement of a young person or family with it, is all about trust, and the trust that this person has in you. and in what you are saying and what you are doing. So I'll often say, you know, you might not have the best, you know, office or the greatest building, or whilst those things are important to creating healing and safety, the most important thing is what you bring. So how do you do that though? I mean, people will say to me, I don't have time, I'm really busy.
Yeah.
I'm a crisis service. And I want to recognise that how important that is. So what I would say to that question is, how will you bring yourself and your presence with another person when you are in crisis or at your worst? Because actually, that is the skills we need to understand. And my view, and I've tried to do some of this in my personal life, is that you practice how you do that when you're not in that situation. So how do you think about yourself, think about what you bring in terms of your energy in those situations, for you to be your best self when you're in those situations, knowing that the reality is you are going to be busy and there will be things that need to be done and all that sort of stuff. Because at every level, whether you are answering the front door, whether you're sitting at a reception desk, whether you're a manager or you are the CEO of an organisation, how you do that with your colleagues and with the people that you work with can change the nature and trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that, and which means that we have a responsibility to be thinking carefully about who we are and ourselves and how we interact.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about some of those other forms of power and what that means for an organisation like us?
We often have conversations about power and we talk about hierarchy. And that's only one form of power and ability to influence in an organisation. And we can see it in different ways, it playing out in different ways. You might have a particular officer that's in your organisation. They're not hierarchically at the highest position, but they can have an awful lot of positive or negative influence on an organisation. And I'm sure all of us can think about examples of where that's happened. Well, that is called power, and that is the power to influence. And why does that happen? It is because the position that you sit in isn't the only way in which you can have influence over others. It can be about the type of relationships you have in the organisation. It can be how others perceive you and who you are and your status in that organisation. There's so many ways in which that can be manifested. And this can be for very positive things as well as for negative things as well. So if we talk about kind of the positive side of power and influence, when we're aware of where we sit, our position, how we influence our relationships and how people see us, that really does give us the ability to give space for others, you know, because we know ourselves. We know where we sit, we know how we influence, so we can have confidence to let go of some of those things for the principle of others to have that space. Now the flip side of that is that because we're human and because we're not perfect, sometimes that can mean that gives us a sense of vulnerability if we do that.
Yep.
And sometimes it's hard to let go of for the purpose of giving space to others, or we can use it in certain ways to benefit ourselves. So that's what I would be really mindful of for people, is understand where you sit, and I mean in terms of your influence and power, the kinds of relationships that you have and that you can influence, and how people see you, no matter what level you sit at. Because some of that power and influence can be informal, and yet it can be very, very influential to do wonderful things to give space for people. The other thing I want to point out too is that there are definitely communities of all of all peoples on broad spectrum of our, diversity of peoples, that in two ways can be influenced around this. First of all, there can be really systemic barriers to them having influence for a range of reasons, whether that's around gender identity or it's around race.
Yep.
There are real systemic barriers. There is real racism and systemic bias that can get in the way of that. But also, because of that, I have seen a lot of people in communities that haven't felt that they could fly as much as I could see that they could fly. They did have power. They were able to influence, but they just didn't have the confidence to kind of stretch those wings out and to do that. It was harder for them to see because of historical and systemic bias and racism. That means that for those of us that are more privileged, that understand our influence, that have that positional power or other types of power, that we need to make sure we're giving space for others to flourish. Because they can do it. But we have to do things to create an environment to make sure that they can grow and be nourished.